My name is Jim Schemmel, the class of 1971, and I'm truly honored to serve Gettysburg College as Chairman of the Board of Trustees. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our guests of honor, Trustee Emeritus Scott Higgins, class of 1967, and his wife Lynn, the generous donors of the Lincoln statue. I'm also pleased to welcome renowned sculptor Stan Watts, if he is here today. He'll be here shortly. Also, I'd like to welcome members of the Board of Trustees of the college, faculty, students, and friends of Gettysburg College. Thank you all for being here on this beautiful day. We are gathered here to celebrate the generosity of Scott and Lynn and to dedicate this bronze sculpture depicting Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. This statue is a very special addition to the Gettysburg College campus, and it will be enjoyed by faculty and students, visiting scholars, and all who travel to this campus. Before we begin, I have one announcement to make. As many of you know, Dr. Alan Gelzo, the Henry R. Luce Professor of the Civil War Era and Director of the Civil War Era Studies at Gettysburg, was slated to speak today. Dr. Gelzo regrets that he is unexpectedly able to be with us here today. Fortunately, Dr. Jill Ogline Titus, Associate Director of Civil War Institute at the college, is here to speak about the historical significance of the Emancipation Proclamation. Dr. Titus earned her PhD in history at the University of Massachusetts. Her academic focus is African American history, public history, and modern U.S. history. She has previously served as the Associate Director of the C.V. Starr Center for the Study of American Experience at Washington College, and she has also worked extensively for the National Park Service, at Independence National Historical Park, and our own Gettysburg National Military Park. Currently, in addition to her responsibilities in the Civil War Institute, she teaches classes in civil rights history at Gettysburg College. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jill Ogline Titus to the podium.
Everyone, and for those of you who are standing and in the sun, I promise that I will be brief. In 1860, almost 4 million people in this country were enslaved. Collectively, they were worth more than all the railroads and factories in the United States combined. Slave prices had never been higher, and the price and demand for cotton had never been stronger. In 1860, cotton accounted for more than 60% of all American exports, making the American South the world's fourth largest economy. Far from being on the verge of dying out, slavery was flourishing and was poised for a potentially massive expansion into the manufacturing sector. Slavery had fueled the growth of the American economy from its infancy, but within 2 years of the firing on Fort Sumter, all this would change. African Americans were the first to act. They identified themselves with the cause of the Union Army well before the Army did, and as soldiers marched into their communities, labor discipline on plantations collapsed. Many enslaved people packed up and followed the Army, offering their services as scouts, laborers, soldiers, laundresses, and cooks. Others fled in the opposite direction, pursuing freedom, and still others remained on the plantation to engage in more subtle acts of resistance. Their actions created an opportunity that the president quickly seized. Abraham Lincoln was born in a slave state and had a near lifelong hatred of slavery. Lincoln's political career was built on a foundation of opposition to the expansion of slavery. He was not an abolitionist, not like Thaddeus Stevens. He wanted slavery to die, but he believed that it was constitutionally protected in the states where it already existed. But the war created an opportunity to maneuver around that obstacle. As African Americans poured into Union lines, bringing with them stories about slaves forced to grow food and build fortifications for the Confederate Army, Lincoln began to see that emancipation could legitimately be justified upon the grounds of military necessity. As long as slavery was protected, it directly benefited the Confederate war effort. Enslaved people not only built defenses and fortifications and raised the crops that sustained the Confederate economy, their presence on the home front freed up white men to join the army and white women to devote more time to supporting the war effort. A formal declaration of emancipation couldn't change these things overnight, but it could help speed up the process of collapsing the system from within, as well as provide a mechanism for former slaves to enlist in the Union Army. Lincoln issued a preliminary decree in September 1862 in the wake of the Union victory at Antietam, stating that unless the rebellious slaves returned to the Union by January 1st, freedom would be granted to slaves within these states. No Confederate states took up the offer, and on January 1st, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, liberating 3 million slaves in areas of the South that were controlled by the Confederacy. It did not apply to the 450,000 men, women, and children living in the border states of Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, and Delaware, or to those in Union-occupied parts of Louisiana, Tennessee, and Virginia. The proclamation was as limited in scope as it was because its constitutional legitimacy was based on the President's War Powers Clause. The United States was not at war with the border states. Thus, emancipation in these states could not be justified on the grounds of military necessity. Lincoln was well aware that no Confederate slave owners would see the proclamation as binding on them, and that it could only be enforced if the Union Army were to prove successful in the field. But he also recognized that enslaved people would see it as a legitimization of their fight, to collapse slavery from within, and as an inspiration to keep fighting. It's quite true that the Emancipation Proclamation itself did not free a single slave, but it marked a vitally important shift in Union policy. Henceforth, the Union Army would not only welcome black men seeking to fight, it would help carry the message of emancipation to enslaved people throughout the South, and in a partial, uneven, piecemeal fashion, support the actions of black men and women who rose up to claim their own freedom. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce Bruce S. Gordon, a graduate of the class of 1968. After his graduation, Bruce launched a career that began at Bell of Pennsylvania, what we used to call the phone company. As a management trainee, he retired 35 years later as chief of Verizon's biggest division, retail markets. Along the way, he earned a master's degree from the MIT Sloan School of Management. Bruce has been a diversity consultant to Fortune 500 companies and has been a member of the boards of CBS Corporation, Northrop Grumman Corporation, Tyco International, Bartech Personnel, the Southern Company, the Advertising Council Incorporated, and others. He has been a leader in many community and nonprofit organizations, including the Lincoln Center, the Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation, the Barnes Foundation, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, the Newport Festivals Foundation, UNICEF, and the New York Urban League. Bruce also chaired the Chancellor's Advisory Board on Student Motivation in the New York public school system. Bruce served as one of our trustees from 1983 to 2005, endowing a scholarship fund to support students who were members of historically underrepresented groups. In 2005, he was selected as president and CEO of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the nation's largest and oldest civil rights organization. During the time he led that organization, many believe he reignited the NAACP's strong advocacy role and boosted the group's public profile. He smoothed strained relations between the NAACP and the White House, meeting with President Bush 3 times in less than a year. In 2006, Bruce was the speaker at Gettysburg's commencement, and his words inspired the graduating seniors and everyone else in the audience on a windy May afternoon. On that day, he said, "At Gettysburg College, I learned that dreams could come true, not because you let them, but because you make them. Please join me in welcoming Bruce Gordon to the platform.
Thank you, Doctor, and good afternoon. And special thanks to the sun that's agreed to tuck itself out of my harm's way, anyway. Beautiful day, honored to be here, honored to really acknowledge Scott and Lynn, your vision, your generosity, this magnificent sculpture. Well done, well done. It's been, in my opinion, as you think about and hear about history over the years, too simplistic to say that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves or that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. And you've all heard that many, many times. I think that Dr. Titus gave the proper perspective, at least as I think about the Emancipation Proclamation. And her statement, the proclamation itself did not free a single slave, is accurate, true, but in no way undermines the significance of that proclamation. It, in fact, is a critical milestone in our history and moved us on a far better course as we move forward. What I'd like to do for a few minutes is just sort of give you a little bit of perspective. It's my perspective. Provide maybe some context in terms of the Emancipation Proclamation and how it did in fact affect the journey that people like me, African Americans, have been on for many, many years in our pursuit not only of freedom, but of equality. And if you will allow me to just give you the definition of those two terms, it may be useful as we sort of talk through some of these critical points. Freedom. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. The state of not being imprisoned or enslaved. Equality. The state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. The right of different groups of people to receive the same treatment. I would argue that our nation has been on a journey. And I would clearly say to you that my people have been on a journey in pursuit of freedom, for sure, but equality even more so. So if you'll allow me to just sort of talk about a period from 1619 to 1965. It's a 346-year period. It's a lot of time. More than 3 centuries, more than 36 U.S. presidents over that period served in the White House. 1619, why? Because that is the year that the first slaves arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. By 1860, there were more than 4 million slaves in this country, and they were the engine of this nation's economy. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation. Dr. Titus has given you a great perspective on what it was about. In 1865, the 13th Amendment. That is the constitutional amendment that in fact abolished slavery and involuntary servitude. That's 246 years after the first slaves arrived in this country. We had a Revolutionary War. We had a Constitution that was ratified in 1788. We had a Civil War and 16 different presidents in the White House. After the 13th Amendment, during the period from 1880 to 1950, more roughly between the end of the Civil War and World War II, there were more than 4,000 lynchings in this country, primarily in the South. In the very same South where slaves were granted their freedom, it was not safe for them to walk the streets even in their own communities. In 1954, that's 91 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously on the Brown versus Board of Education. That gave us equal access to public education. I was a young man, but still in my lifetime, still in the lifetime of some of you in this audience. And I'll remind you, freedom, equality. 1964, 101 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil Rights Act was passed, and it banned discrimination in public places, in schools, in the workplace. It was signed by the 36th President of the United States. I was a freshman at Gettysburg College when that was signed. 1965, the Voting Rights Act, 102 years after Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. The great-grandchildren of those slaves freed by Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment were finally, some 100+ years following that emancipation, given the right to vote. It took a century, a full century, to progress from the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment to the kinds of equality that goes well beyond freedom itself. Freedom without equality, I wouldn't want to say is worth nothing, but understanding what was made possible by these steps along the way, I think you begin to understand the point that I'm trying to make. Fast forward, 2008. The nation elected its first African American president. Barack Obama became the 44th president and a resident of the White House. Even today, I will tell you that when I see him step off of Air Force One, when I see him step out into the White House lawn, when I see him hang a medal on a soldier who served in the armed forces, my emotions are mixed. I will tell you I get a little teary. I'll tell you that I am full of pride. There's still, for me, an element of disbelief, but also there's concern. And you might say, well, why would there be concern when you have an African American in the White House? And I would tell you that there are too many people, after President Obama was elected, who said it's over. We now live in a post-racial society. And all these things that are part of our history, we need not be concerned about going forward. To that I say nonsense. I say nothing could be further from the truth. The struggle for freedom and equality continues, and by any measure, there's an underclass in America today, and membership in that underclass, it can be directly connected to ethnicity. If you're an African American, there's a good chance that you are a member of that underclass. Some random statistics just to sort of validate the point. 14% of all Americans live below the poverty line. 28% of African Americans live below the poverty line. Black unemployment in this country is twice that of whites, and some would argue that that is a gross understatement. The black median household income is about 64% of whites. Incarceration rates for whites is 450 per 100,000 citizens, and for African Americans, it's more than 2,300 per 100,000 citizens, a 5-to-1 differential. Blacks are less than 13% of the population, but more than 42% of the occupants on death row. I would suggest to you that capital punishment is no more than a modern-day lynching. Down the road in Baltimore, we all watched the horrific aftermath of Freddie Gray's killing. At the heart of that matter, in my mind, the existence of a hopeless class in that community. Just 3 statistics. That community is 72 city blocks large. 40% of the children in that community live below the poverty line. The unemployment rate is 25%. Enough. I could go on, but I think that the statistics are clear, and there are many, many more to make the case. For all of its faults in this country, this is the country that I choose to live in. This is the best country to live in. And I would never want to live any other place. But that does not stop me from being disappointed when our country underperforms. Along our road, throughout our history, we have had moments of greatness. But Jim Collins, who was a celebrated author, a business author, wrote a book called Good to Great. And Jim Collins said, good is the enemy of great. I believe today we're a good country, but I don't think we're great. And I think we need to be great. And I think that we can be great. But I think we're missing a grand opportunity, and we need to deal with it. I don't know enough of my history to understand what might have been in Abraham Lincoln's heart. But here's what I'm sure of. This man was pragmatic. This man had a war to win. And he was tactical. And he knew that the Emancipation Proclamation's time had come, and he could use that tactic to win a war and put his nation, the nation that he was leading, on a better course. So he used it. I don't mind that. I don't mind and feel no need to evaluate or judge Abraham Lincoln's heart. I respect his pragmatism. And I think we all could learn a lesson from that. I don't know about you, but I worry about this country. I worry about our competitiveness. I worry as I see ourselves stacked up against other nations around the globe and realize that our stature, our competitiveness, the quality of our education systems, et cetera, are not measuring up. And in fact, we are losing ground. We are losing our opportunity to achieve the greatness that we have within our grasp. And why is that? Well, it's a complex question, and there are many elements to the answer. But I would argue to you that what we fail to do is to take full advantage of our human capital. We fail to take advantage of all of the people in this nation who could help make us great. Inclusion, diversity is what is our source of competitive advantage. But we're missing that opportunity. And I think we need to be pragmatic. It's not a matter of the morality of the issue. It's a matter of whether we are committed to putting our nation in a position where our children and our grandchildren and so on, generations to come, will have the benefit of thriving and surviving in the greatest nation in the world. It will be a great nation when we have the courage to face up and participate in the discussion on race. We find it difficult as a nation to speak and talk about race. And as long as we find that difficult, we will not address the issues that keep us from being great. There's a great divide in this country. We need to close it. Here's my vision, Lynn, Scott, for this sculpture, this magnificent sculpture. I would hope that every time a person walks by it, they pause, they think, they understand the act that's taking place there, and it causes them to just think about the conversation of race, to think about the conversation around haves and have-nots, the conversation around the existence of an underclass in America that keeps us from being great. And in this great institution, Gettysburg College, in this academic environment, we use this reminder to have the conversation, to have the discussion, so that members of this community, whether they're students, faculties, tourists, whatever, use the opportunity and take the moment to ask themselves the question, can we be the great nation that we have been in the past if we look from border to border, from coast to coast, from north to south, and find the solution that taps every single person in our community to contribute to the growth and excellence of the United States of America. I think that the opportunity is immense. I think the obligation is unquestionable. I think that we, if we decide, will choose to be great as a nation once again. That's my wish, that's my hope, and that's what I see when I look at that sculpture. Several years ago, Scott called and said, let's get together for lunch. And we met in Tribeca, downtown Manhattan, at a little Italian restaurant, and broke some bread, and Scott said, got an idea. As you would imagine, Scott's thorough, thoughtful. He had sketches, he had concepts, he had a plan. And he described what he wanted to do. He described how he wanted to do it. And in the Scott Higgins way, it was evident that he and Lynn were on a journey, and they weren't going to be denied. The results speak for themselves. I think, once again, that Lynn and Scott, your vision and your generosity are something that we will appreciate for years to come. We thank you very much. And at this point in time, the podium is yours.
Well, I am never going to follow Bruce Gordon to the podium. I'll tell you right now. You should be running for President of the United States. I think that was so eloquent, and I couldn't agree with you more. You really nailed it. You know, when I was talking to you a couple of years ago about this at our lunch, I was talking about the national conversation that we needed to have on race, and that when we talked to Janet about this, we said it has to be connected with a program here of trying to talk and have a conversation and a dialogue about race, and she agreed. And out of that came the program that we had over lunch, which I thought was wonderful. And out of that came your request of Bruce, who very kindly obliged with this eloquent conversation. So we're delighted to be here. And I just want to introduce my spouse, Lynn Higgins, who you may have seen her movies and loved every one of them, as a person who came up to me in Amtrak the other day and said, I love this woman. Anyway, she's a movie star. And our son, Parker Higgins, from the class of 2012. So we're delighted to be here. This is a real opportunity for us to give back to Gettysburg College. And I think this is a magnificent statue of Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. It exceeds my expectations, as that's what Janet said, it exceeds my expectations too. Stan has worked on this to the 11th hour. This was delivered this morning and installed this morning, and it is proof of the old adage that work fills the time allotted to it. We have two others who wish they were here, family members. Trent Higgins, our middle son, is at Skidmore College, and Drew Higgins is at Carleton College. It's a lot of fun writing 3 checks when your kids are in college. Fortunately, Parker is out. Anyway, they couldn't attend today because they were taking classes at their respective institutions. You see, if they had attended Gettysburg, it wouldn't have been a problem. It would have been right here. We did want to take a moment, more than a moment, to thank President Janet Riggs and Michael Berkner, wherever you are, for your work in making this possible, your leadership and your support. And a big thanks to the development team, who worked very hard in putting this together, this venue, all the improvements that have been made. They're really wonderful, particularly Ed Cable, the Associate Director of Development. There he is back there. He was with us every part of the way. And Jim Beisinger, I think, was lifting up the statue to put it on this morning. He's the Director of Facilities. If you're here, Jim, great job. And I know Professor Guelzo would have loved to have been here, and I wish him a speedy recovery in the hospital. Special thanks to the panelists at the luncheon today, Dr. Titus, Dr. Scott Hancock, Dr. Carmichael. They were terrific. They spoke very eloquently of the of the issues and the historical, the political implications of Lincoln's actions. And of course, thank you to Dr. Titus and especially my classmate Bruce Gordon for his eloquent comments today. Another hand for Bruce, really, just remarkable. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, just fabulous. So I graduated from Gettysburg College in 1967 with a major in history, and Bruce reminded me that I'm almost 70 next month. He's still younger than I am, though. Okay. Reason I came to Gettysburg College, Frank Sprigg, he went by Sprigg Gardner, who was the most successful high school wrestling coach in the history of the sport, came to Gettysburg to be the coach of wrestling, and he recruited me here. He was my mentor. And I thrived here. I was president of my class, luckily. I pursued a real passion in wrestling while I was here. I was an All-American athlete, and my history professors left a real lifelong impression on me, particularly Dr. Robert Bloom. Some of you may remember him. I'm sure you remember him. He was chair of the history department and a really exceptional Civil War historian, and I worked with him on my senior independent study group. We had to read a book, or I had to read a book every week and then come in and discuss it with him. He had read it, so he really put me through the paces here, but it was a terrific experience. And so on graduation day, I was surprised and really honored to receive this Charles Beecham Award for character, scholarship, and athletic achievement. The scholarship piece was etched out, but it did appear on the scholarship athletic achievement. So all in all, I was most grateful for my time here. I want to give you a little background on my experience after I left Gettysburg. I had planned to attend the MBA program at Wharton, but I was in ROTC, and when I graduated, I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Army. And on that same day, I received my orders for Vietnam. So I was a little concerned. Of course, my parents were epileptic. But I went over there just in time for the Tet Offensive, which was January 31st, 1968, a day that I will never remember. Thank God, and never forget. I will always remember. I made it back, unlike a lot of my compatriots, and I was, I was very lucky. Then I went on, and Tet was the turning point of the Vietnam War, just like the Battle of Gettysburg. So there's some symmetry in that, I suppose. Anyway, I returned safely back, and then I finally went to Wharton and got an MBA there, and I started a 25-year career on Wall Street. And but Gettysburg was still very much with me when I was trying to help my fellow vets. I came into New York, and I was tapped by the mayor, Mayor Koch, wonderful guy who had been a sergeant in the Army, and he tapped me to be the co-chairman of the New York Vietnam Veterans Memorial Commission with Donald Trump, of all people. But anyway, so over 5 years, the commission built a stunning memorial in Lower Manhattan, and if you haven't seen it, it's right off the FDR Drive. You should see it. We wrote a book called Dear America, Letters Home from Vietnam, which was a bestseller, and then we put together a movie by the same name that won HBO its first Emmy. And then the commission organized a welcome home parade for Vietnam veterans, which became the largest ticker tape parade in New York's history. Initially, we didn't think anybody was going to show up, but it was very successful. So when I retired from Wall Street, Lynn and I founded the company that we run today. It's called Veterans Advantage, and it's the leading card benefit program for military veterans and their family members. And we partner with major companies that want to thank our veterans for their service. We're especially proud of Parker because he's recently become the director of our new Salt Lake City office. And I'm also, isn't it great, isn't it? And very pleased with that. I'm also proud to say that my Gettysburg classmate, fraternity brother, and lifelong friend, who's sitting next to Fred Fielding there, Chuck Widger, the former chair of the Gettysburg Board of Trustees, has been an early benefactor of Veterans Advantage. Thank you, Chuck. And another fraternity brother and great friend here today, I think Bud Haldeman is here. I hope he's here. has been a big supporter of Veterans Advantage. He's a big Ford dealer, and he arranged the benefit that we have with Ford and Lincoln at the corporate level. It's terrific. So anyway, I've been very honored to serve on the Gettysburg Board for 11 years and continue today as a trustee emeritus, and I'm also very proud to serve on the Lincoln Prize Committee with President Riggs, where we select, the finest book on Lincoln for the year. And Gilder and Lehrman Institute provide the money for that, and it's awarded annually the finest scholarly work on Lincoln, and it really is terrific. Professor Guelzo has won it unprecedented 3 times, a real inspiration for all of us to keep writing about Lincoln. We also want to give our deepest thanks to sculptor Stan Watts, who's in the back there. For his work in beautifully rendering this Lincoln statue. He really caught the import of Lincoln's act of signing the Emancipation Proclamation. And if you'll focus on the head, you'll notice the eyes are like a laser-like focus on signing the Emancipation. Lincoln had been greeting people in the White House on January 1st. It was open during those days. And his hands were swollen. And he took time out in the afternoon to go up and make sure that his hands would go down and he could write legibly. And so you'll notice that he's only formed the A here, so there's a lot of unfinished work, as Bruce has alluded to, as mentioned. So, over the past year, as Bruce said, we've witnessed trials and traumas that remind us that Lincoln's work is not finished. But that's where you, the students and the stewards at Gettysburg College, come in and continue this national conversation, so important. So we dedicate this statue today, placed in this historic part of the campus. I think Mr. Lincoln would be pleased with it. I know Thaddeus Stevens would be pleased with it. To serve as an inspiration and an invitation for us to rediscover our past, reevaluate our future, and to address these significant unresolved issues of our time, while at the same time recognizing the greatness that has come before us. So we thank each and every one of you here at the college who's played a role in making this happen today and bringing this monument to the campus and making it a reality. For my family and me, it has been a great honor. Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to welcome President Janet Morgan Riggs to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. I do want to thank all of you for being here in the midst of sirens and motorcycles. No one should ever say that we didn't have bells and whistles at this ceremony. But truly thank you for being here on this Friday afternoon. It is a great day for the town of Gettysburg, and it's a great day for the campus here. Thank you so much. And I do want to offer sincere thanks to Scott and Lynn. You had a vision. And Bruce talked about that, and here it is, and I think some of us, as we walked up today and saw the statue for the first time, began to really appreciate that vision and join you in that vision. In fact, I heard a few people say, it looks so right here. It looks like it's been here all along, and I think that's the mark of a very fine sculpture. So thank you for that. You know, I was going to share with you some information about Scott Higgins. I have about 2 or 3 pages here. But he introduced himself, and frankly, it was far more interesting hearing him talk about his story from the time he came to Gettysburg on than it would have been for me to rattle on about that. And so I think we all really appreciated hearing that from your point of view. But let me just offer one comment about Scott, which is very obvious, I think, from all that he said. And that is, he's been an amazing citizen of New York City. He's been an amazing American citizen. And he's been an amazing citizen of Gettysburg College. And we thank you for all of those things. Thank you so much. I too would like to recognize Stan Watts back here for joining us today. I think many of you do know that Stan specializes in historic bronze sculptures. And another one of his statues stands just down the street in front of the public library here in Gettysburg, also commissioned and sponsored by Scott and Lynn Higgins. So if you haven't had the opportunity to see that, I would invite you to take some time this weekend to wander downtown, right in front of the library. On the east side of the street, you will see another spectacular Lincoln statue here in Gettysburg. But this statue here will serve as a lasting reminder of the significant events that transpired here on our campus and in our town in 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg, which literally swept through our campus and saw our main administration building, Pennsylvania Hall, transformed into a hospital to serve the wounded. And of course, the Gettysburg Address, where our own Gettysburg College alumnus, David Wills, class of 1851, personally invited President Lincoln to come for the cemetery dedication to say a few appropriate remarks. And of course, as Bruce said, this sculpture serves as a reminder for the work we have to continue today. And I very much appreciated what you said about the conversations that this sculpture should enable and encourage on our campus, and we will take on that work. Thank you. And now finally, I'd like to do a formal dedication of this statue as we remember and honor the legacy of President Abraham Lincoln. As president of Gettysburg College and on behalf of the entire Gettysburg College Board of Trustees, it is my great honor on this day, September 18th, 2015, to dedicate this statue commemorating President Abraham Lincoln and the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. On behalf of the entire Gettysburg College community, we cannot thank you enough, Scott and Lynn. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here today.